Welcome to the fourth part of my tutorials on how to create a horror game. My name is Igor Aherne, and in here I teach you the skill of creating beautiful computer games as an indie developer. Essentially what I've done is I took a 5-hour session and compressed it down to a 1.5-hour tutorial. Some of the topics of today's lesson are displayed on the screen, and we are already on a quite advanced level. However, if you are new to my lessons or to the game development as a whole, please refer to my previous 3 tutorials. Make sure that you learn them well and come back here. I'll be waiting. For everybody else, welcome to the lesson and let's get started. We're slowly approaching the process of rigging the character, but we're not quite there yet. Before this happens, we need to understand how to model him correctly and also how to texture him properly. My character now consists of 2 parts. This is a head and a body over here. If I select the body and right click and go into object properties, you can see how many faces it has. Right now it has got 1500 of faces. If we close this window and go and check the head, right click on it and go into properties, you can see that it only consists of 500 of polygons. Altogether this is 2000, and this is very good result, because for game you wouldn't want to go above 3500 of polygons. But right now we got 2000 and we are really on the safe side. If this would be a World of Warcraft character or any character for online gaming, especially with customization such as armor or anything, you would want to keep the body quite low, somewhere below 1000 of polygons. Also, no matter how hard you look over here, you won't find any triangular polygons. This character is only modeled with quads. Those are the square polygons. And as a rule of thumb, any kind of organic geometry should be modeled just with quads. So no triangular pieces, no pentagons, no hexagons. Only quads. To ensure that the mesh deforms correctly later when we rig the character, we need to ensure that it has correct positioning of loops on the knees, elbows, fingers, and feet. Over here you can see that it has got 3 loops on the knees, 3 loops on the elbows, and also several of the loops on the joints of the fingers. The reason why I have 2 objects making up my character is because their high polygon representations weigh so much that if this would be a single mesh and I import this a single high polygon mesh into 3ds Max, it would definitely crash, or at least not allow me to rotate smoothly around the scene. That's why I'm going to import separately the body, project the normals on my body part, and then delete the high polygon model for the body, import the high polygon representation for the head, project the normals on the head, and get rid of the high polygon representation, just remaining with my efficient character parts. Once again, if you're not familiar with the terms I'm using right now, please refer to the previous tutorials, such as part 3, part 2, or part 1. Having done this character review, let's start rolling slowly towards texturing our character and looking over UV layouts. If we look at this different character, you can see that I've already applied the unwrap UVW modifier, the one you became familiar with in the 3rd tutorial. And I've also set up some of the seams. Notice how I've placed them. They are located in places away from the face, in the parts that aren't taking as much of attention as the face would. So no seams on the face, and the rest of the seams go under the chin, across the neck, because there isn't any better place for it to go. Seams go around the ear like this, starting from this point. And finally this big seam going on the back of the head, creating this T shape. Also, because my character will be talking, I've placed this seam over here on the mouth. You can see if I press F3 and go into wireframe mode, you can see that actually there are 2 sides of polygons over here inside of the mouth, just so that when the character opens his mouth and talks later, you won't see the big black part inside of his mouth. It's actually going to be capacious and have some volume inside, so this is like the inside of the mouth over there. Finally, there is one more interesting thing that you can do when unwrapping your character. I've set up the seams, but I haven't done the pelting yet, only for the front part of the face. So if I press on edit, this will bring up our table for laying out the UVs for our face. And you can observe that I've done the front of the face and placed it aside of the main area over here. But the back side of the head is still waiting to be adjusted. So let's click on one of the polygons on the back side of the head and click Expand Selected Faces to Seams. Here is what it does. Then we can go and click Pelt, bring this to the side, start the pelting, and start relaxing. Then stop relaxing, and we have our part stretched out and ready to grab a texture. Do the same thing for the left part as well. After you've done both parts of your head, it would be a good idea to scale them accordingly so that they have similar sizes, and position them somewhere on your UV layout so that they take some space of the texture. They are less important once again compared to the front part of the face, so position them somewhere in the corner and make sure that they take less space than the front part of the face will. Go through the rescaling and position them so that they take the maximum amount of texture. Finally, the ears have to be pelted out as well. Put them aside right now. Ears are still quite close to the front part of the face, and so they should be taking kind of more of the texture when compared in a ratio to the back part of the head. Finally, a good approach would be to press M and assign a material to your head. And following the idea of the second tutorial, click over here and select checker. Press over here to view it on the head. You can reduce the size of the checker by tiling it several times, so for instance 4 times. Compare how the texture flows on different parts of the head. Our positioning of seams becomes very important once you start to scale different parts of the head relative to each other. So if all of those parts would be equal in size, they would be sampling texture in the same way, and those seams wouldn't be so noticeable. But now, because for instance the front part of the head takes much more space than the sides, the texture looks bigger here and more detailed on the front part of the face, revealing this seam on the side. And if it would be placed on the front side, on the front part of the head, it would be very visible and very irritating. The checker also allows us to see the distortions of the texture. We can press 1 and go into vertex editing mode. Select the vertices and see where the distortion occurs and perhaps fix it. For example, over here. If we bring this vertex to the right over here, the texture will get better. There you go, we fixed it. You can also look around the model and see which parts can be adjusted. Obviously, the smaller the square is, the smaller the polygons are on the UV layout, the less texture will be sampled and less detailed the surface will look on your mesh. Reduce them, reduce the squares if you want to provide less texture, and increase the squares if you want model to have more details in some particular areas, for example on the mouth. But then adjust the points as well so that the texture on the edges is not distorted too much. Of course, it would require much more neat work than just selecting and rescaling, by going into vertex mode and adjusting each vertex individually, and then check the whole appearance of the model. Finally, to ensure that your seams aren't as much visible as right now, you want to have a look at how much different parts of the head are sampling of your texture, how much detail they are getting. Although we want to keep the resolution of texture quite low on the back part, you would want to increase this resolution for exactly this area where it's joining the front part of the head, which is quite detailed. And you would want to increase the size of texture of the detail that this part of the head is sampling at the back side of the head. So obviously if you increase the area the texture is sampled from, your texture is going to be now more detailed and your checker will look smaller. You want to have this so that the flow of the texture is more natural, from more detailed areas to lower detailed areas. Here is what I was talking about. Now, after those adjustments were done, the texture flows nicer from this part of the head to another side. Although this is more detailed, and that part of the head, the back, is less detailed. But the way we've adjusted the sizes of those polygons on the texture now allows the texture to flow smoother from more detailed part of the head to a less detailed part. This process of course stretched out the side part, and I had to readjust my layout for the other parts so that they stay within the boundaries. If they go to the side like this means that this part over here will be sampling from over here, and we don't want this, because we'll be putting normal textures on the head. Okay guys, over here you can see me finishing up the UV layout, just checking out for the distortions that are occurring on the hands and trying to fix them out by moving vertices. So you should watch out for those distortions, because once your template is ready, your artists, you for instance, if you're texturing the character yourself, you won't remember which kind of distortions were there. You have to always watch out and try to put your layout in such a way that your grid, that your straight grid is going to be straight over here as well. You won't be having, ideally you wouldn't like to have those kind of curves on the hand, because once you draw a texture, on those parts it would be distorted and bent in an undesired way. So really, to avoid this, you could bend it the opposite way in Photoshop, but to improve the quality, it's better to go straight away and fix those distortions by moving vertices in a different way, and their neighbors as well. So for instance, this square is straightened up by moving those two vertices, this one as well, in different directions, straightening up. So for instance, if it would be like this, you can see that this isn't very good, because boom, there is such a big distortion. That's why you want to try and preserve the position and relation of each polygon relative to each other on the model, but try to unfold it in a very nice and clean way. This is us finishing up the first example. Very basic approach, where you have each part laid out once again, having its own separate space. This isn't a very good approach for gaming. Actually, it's quite a bad approach for gaming, but once again with the face, for example, that way you are quite sure that when he talks, when the character talks, there won't be any seams on the face, for example. But there's a second approach, which allows us to put much more detailed texture on the character. Actually keep the same texture, but make the character much more detailed, approximately twice more detailed than right now. But this is a different approach, and let's finish this one for now by just laying out different parts next to each other. When scale your palms, watch out for the sizes of the grid or your checker. You want to have everything approximately equal size, so that the detail of the texture is spread evenly across all the body parts. So for example, if your arm is going to be too small, you're going to see immediately that the grid changes to a bigger size. Of course, if you applied the checker material, like I explained in the beginning. So make sure everything stays the same size and pack the parts tightly. So for example, like this. This is the bottom part of this part as well. So they are joining together. It's the bottom part of right palm, and this is the top part of right palm as well. How can you move this one, and how can you put it really tightly to this one? You can try to rotate it, you can try to scale it, but really the way to do is just position it like this, right click and then flip horizontal, and then your thumbs just fit perfectly together. Just watch out so that vertices don't cross each other, don't cross the borders of different parts. And after this is done, for the left palm, there is only one more thing to do, which is the top part of left palm. Here's the trick. Notice those settings for the pelt when we're stretching the hand out. Our hand reminds us of a tomato right now, but when we stop the pelt and start relaxing, the hand starts to appear on its place. Now you can change the strength settings and stiffness to 0, because we'll be relaxing our arm. And start relaxing. Don't forget that you can also relax in different regimes, so for example by face angles. Wait until it goes. You can relax by different amounts and different speeds. If you press apply, that's just gonna do whatever number of iterations you have right there. If you press start relax, that's gonna be relaxing until you click it off. Then when you're ready, press commit and have your arm relaxed and pelted. And scale it down, watch for the grid size, make sure it fits to the arm, position it somewhere where you want it to be approximately, and start readjusting the vertices of the palm. Finally, what's most important, ensure that the top part of the hand and the bottom part of the hand have the same size of the checker. Otherwise, you're gonna have obvious problems. So right now, the bottom part is more detailed than the top one because the checker is obviously smaller. That's why we need to scale down the arm and the checker will get bigger. So right now, they're approximately the same detailization, and that's okay. Finally, let's just position it where we want it to be. And right click and once again flip horizontal so that it sticks in between the thumb of the top part. Great. Just going back, you can notice several things are not the way you want them to be. So perhaps on this sleeve, the distortion occurs along those vertices. So you could just move them left to right and see what happens. Okay, obviously it's better to touch this one, not to touch the other one. So we can just move the vertices and adjust accordingly. You can click on the vertices directly and see them highlight in the editor. If you are struggling to find a vertex once you clicked it in the world, if you are struggling to find one in the UV editor, then you can just press 3 and click on the polygon. Make sure that F2 is not pressed on because you won't be able to see it. So once you click the polygon, you'll easily find it in your layout. Also pay attention to this part. If you are working on some kind of separate part of your character or cloth and you click on the vertex that is located on the seam, watch out because you're gonna select on the UV layout, although this is one vertex, on the UV layout you're gonna select 2 of them. Say you were intending to adjust the vertex on the front part, this one, but when you move it, watch what happens to the same vertex but on the back side. So by moving this one vertex, you're gonna be altering 2 sides simultaneously. So to avoid this, just click on this vertex and then make sure you press Alt, just grab and deselect the remaining vertices that are associated with it. Make sure that there is nothing on the layout as well anywhere else, so that you're just working with one piece on the front part. So what have we achieved in this first half? Well, we've laid out each single piece and made it so that it has its own space. So every part of our UV layout, every part of our character is going to be sampling from a different piece of the texture, 1024 by 1024 texture that we're going to supply to it. But right now you should be wondering, because this is a pretty big amount of pixels and we should be able to achieve proper detailization of characters with this amount. However, you can see that the torso is only going to be sampling about 1/6 of the texture space, which isn't really serious. And at the end, even with this kind of texture, which is pretty big, with this kind of texture, the character isn't going to be very detailed and is going to be looking pretty crappy. So for gaming, there's a different approach, which you should take when texturing the characters. With this approach, you could even fit the head into the same texture size, and it still would be pretty detailed. The second approach you would use for online gaming, and this is exactly what World of Warcraft is using. To be fair, they are only using 1024 by 1024 textures for characters, but they are looking pretty damn amazing. The way to do it is, first of all, it is usually only possible with symmetrical characters, or if one part of your character isn't really symmetrical to the other side, just find common parts that are symmetrical and force them to sample from the same area. Literally, what I mean right now is that, for example, this back part of the torso over here, which you can see at the back, so if I expand faces to seams, this back part right now is sampling this whole area, and really it could be halved. Because this part is symmetrical, we can force it to sample only from this side. Left part could be sampling from here, and the right part could be sampling from here as well. Sorry for the colors, but here is the right part, and the left part could be sampling also from over here, from the same area. You could do it in 2 ways. First one would be to draw different kind of seams and split your back part into 2 parts. You would have to draw a seam like this and literally have two parts, left part of the back and right part of the back as well. Then you would force right part to sample from here, and you would force left part to sample from exactly the same place as well, because they are symmetrical in each direction, meaning that you can just flip over left to the right and they will be sampling from the same area, which is going to be mirrored. But because your character is mirrored, that's totally fine. And what do we have at the end of the day? We're gonna save half of our texture, and this is an enormous amount, plus the fact that we are using the same head from the same character in the same texture template, which is great. Really, the way to alter this character after this and make it less symmetrical would be just to add some kind of special attributes, for example, hat, skirt, or a staff that he's going to be carrying in his hand, or some kind of weapon, different kind of attributes that aren't going to make him as symmetrical as he might seem from the first glance. But this is a great approach, and this is very useful, and this is what I'm going to explain to you right now. This is the one that you should be using. Also, make sure that you are saving the right channel, and if you don't know, you can have different channels and different UV layouts per character, depending on different purposes that you might assign each layout to. So right now we're saving map channel 1. Make sure it's on 1, and make sure you're saving the same one as you've been working on. Once this is ready, you can go ahead and mess everything up if you want to. Once again, make sure that your model is symmetrical before you start doing this process, because if it isn't, you're gonna have some slight troubles. However, they can be avoided. You must understand that there should be a straight line across the middle of the character and the head as well, to allow us to have clear left side and clear right side. But if we look closer, I've deliberately messed something up over here. This is exactly what you shouldn't be doing over here. You must have a straight line going from top to bottom, but here it's broken into one polygon. This is really bad, and you should avoid at all times doing this kind of problem. When building your characters, ensure that it has a straight line going through the center. Don't do this kind of polygons in the center, because this is gonna mess up or add slight difficulties to your process, and you don't want this. But in my case, you can't go into modal and actually, after you've unwrapped it, you can't go into editable poly, connect those two vertices with a segment, those two, because as soon as I do it, this is gonna mess up my whole unwrap UVW layout. Have a look at this. If I right click and connect, because I have this mode turned on, we're gonna see everything that's gonna happen on top. So on top of our editable poly is our unwrap UVW, because we've pressed this button. And if I press connect and connect those two vertices with a segment, boom, our unwrap UVW just flew away. If we unclick our vertex and go up a level, you see that we've just ruined our work. And you can't roll back with Ctrl Z, it doesn't work. The only way out right now is not to panic and pray to God that you didn't press Ctrl save. You can go ahead and open the earlier version that you didn't save, this one, and make sure you press no to save, and just open your version that you saved a second ago. Or if you were clever enough, you could just go ahead, make sure you've removed this edge from over here to restore the model to its original position. So make sure there is no edge over there, remove it. And now we have our polygon back again over here, but our UV layout is still screwed up. The way to fix it now is, because we've restored our original model, would be to go to unwrap UVW and basically load our saved version. But because I have such problem over here, I'm gonna have to work around this, which is gonna be handy to you as well, because you'll understand how you can get out of some slight problems like this one. Okay, so we're gonna mirror from left to right, yes, and we're gonna sample from this side. So basically we're gonna texture only right part of our torso, and the left one is gonna be folded over on top of right part. So how are we gonna do this? Basically, we just need to ensure that the left part is flipped to the right. To do this, all we need to do is press 3 and select our left part, that is, select its polygons, press Alt and deselect any of unwanted ones, and for this problematic polygon, either select it or deselect it. And you can work either with crossing or with window mode of selection, so that you either select everything including the ones that you've crossed, or just the ones that you've selected inside of the box. when dragging your cursor. Or you can manually pick them with Alt and Control clicking. Then after you've done this, you can go into Tools or simply right click and select not flip but mirror horizontal. And what this done is basically just flip this over. You can then press Shift and drag and move it to the left. Now hold on a second, because you can see that if I drag it aside, that our part is not detached but it's still attached. And if you drag it left and right, those lines represent the polygons that are distorted in a crazy way. So make sure that you drag yours only horizontally with pressing Shift, because right now there is a huge polygon that is distorted on the back side over there behind those ones. So to minimize this effect, all we need to do is press Shift, bring this part to the left, align it to your best ability with the right part underneath it, and then obviously this polygon that is bent is going to be straightened out and is going to be equivalent of the ones that are lying on the top of it. Perfect. Now the final part that is left to do is to simply adjust each single vertex so that it sits on exact top of its neighbor that is lying underneath it. So this is like basically building a sandwich. This is a great technique, firstly because it allows us to texture at a very cheap price, and we can texture in a way that is twice more efficient and twice better, twice more detailed. We can also do normal mapping in a perfect way, and it's going to be working perfectly on both sides of the model, so this is very neat as well. And this is the exact technique you should be using when working with computer games, because after we've done everything and all the parts have been halved and flipped over, you're gonna have half of your texture freed up for you to use. And what you're gonna do, of course, you're gonna scale up your details and make them fill as much of the space as possible. Basically, essentially just allowing them to grab more of the texture. Doesn't mean that they're gonna be getting some kind of random parts of texture into their way. Basically means that the template that we supply is gonna use the texture to its best ability. It's gonna grab the biggest amount of pixels, and it's gonna make your model very, very detailed. Another word of advice is that when making normal maps, make sure that they aren't very special on this center line over here for your character, because whatever you do on the right side is going to be mirrored to the left side, and the left side is not going to be considered at all. So make sure that anything that happens on the central line isn't something huge, and that the dents on the center line aren't very visible and are minor. You wouldn't want to bring the attention towards the center of the character. Of course, the flipping for the central part is pretty straightforward, but what do you do for the arms? For the arms, you just need to overlay them on top of the respecting right part with being mirrored. That's it. So for example, we have the left arm, which is over here, and we have also the right arm next to it over here. This is the same process, but we would simply need to grab a hold of this arm and position it on top of left one like this, with being in this case flipped vertical, or mirror vertical, excuse me, because the way I've positioned it is basically I've taken this whole thing and rotated it 90 degrees, so it has to be flipped vertical, because over here it's the shoulder connection and over here it's the sleeve connection. Then go over and do this hard work of adjusting each vertex, but after you've done this, you're gonna have much more detailed character. This is a great technique. World of Warcraft uses it a lot for its characters and achieves great levels of detailization with pretty low texture sizes, so make sure you master it. Game engines use materials to provide texture to our models, and as game developers, it is very important for us to ensure that the game runs smoothly. We can greatly improve the performance by using smaller amount of materials, and in order to be able to do this, we need to force different models sample from the same textures. At the end of the day, we're trying to come out with a texture which is 1024 by 1024, which should be a companion to our body. But because we've greatly optimized our UV layout, it has now space for the head to go as well. But if you look closely, we have two different objects, which is the body and the head. They are two separate objects. Each one has different UV layout. But really we can force them to sample from the same texture. And in order to be able to do this, we need to adjust the UV layout for the body. If we go into the body's UV layout, you can see that there is no space for the head to go, and so we need to free some of the space where the details for our head will go in the texture. That's why we're going to select our parts and scale them down, and then rearrange them on the grid. We want to come out with something like an empty space in the corner right there. Here we go. I've rearranged our UV layout, and now we got some space for the head to go. But once again, our head is a different object. While editing its UVs, you won't be able to see the UVs for the body. That's why we're going to do a template of the body's parts and use it as a background while laying out UVs for the head. Press on the tools and render UV template. 1024 by 1024. It doesn't really matter because it's temporarily. Anything that isn't too big and that is comfortable for you to use. Use red fill, solid. Do not show overlap because our parts are obviously overlapping because there are two of them on top of each other. Don't do visible edges. Don't show seam edges, and render UV template. Save it in the place which will be easy for you to find, such as on desktop, and call it head layout helper and save it in a JPEG format. Close everything else. Get out of any modifier, so go on top and switch to the head. My head already got unwrap UVW modifier applied to it. That's why we're going to go into edit, and this is my layout for the head. If I expand it to maximum size, you can see that it's not laid out properly, and you remember we left some of the space on the right here for our head to go. We are going to scale it down because obviously this is going to be too big, and just barely position it somewhere in the corner. We will improve it later. After this is done, let's click on the view and deselect show grid, then click over here, pick a texture, maps, bitmap, go to desktop or wherever you saved it, and click our head layout helper. If you zoom in, you can see this is what I was talking about. Basically, if you move anything out of your square, it's just going to sample from an area to the left of that square. So it doesn't matter how much you translate your parts. For example, if you move this thing here, it's going to be sampling exactly from here, from the main square. With this layout, we can already see where we can position our head so it doesn't interfere with other parts of the body, and we can actually see how much of scale we are allowed to use. So let's scale up our head. Let's scale up everything because we don't want to break the scale between each other, and reposition our parts so that they fit in with the parts of the main body. While I was rearranging my parts, one thing struck me. I forgot to rearrange the head into two halves. Just as in the case with the central part of my main body of the character, you can simply mirror one of the halves to the right or to the left, doesn't matter. It depends which side you want to be texturing. But it's the best not to use the mirror option, but to use a flip horizontal. This splits the face of main character into two parts, effectively putting a seam across the whole face. But I'll tell you the benefit of doing flip horizontal over mirror horizontal in a second. After you've done this, of course you need to adjust the vertices on the head, so take your time and ensure that the borders especially fit perfectly together. After you fix the head, which is now consisting of two parts, perhaps do the same thing for the central part of the body and split it into two parts in the same way. Basically flip horizontal, but for now keep them on top of each other and keep readjusting the layout. This is the part that I don't care about at all. It is located at the bottom of the neck over there, and nobody will ever see it, so you can place it wherever you want. But still I have some space on the texture, so I'll just rotate it and position it there. Once again, ensure that there are no vertices crossing other polygons of other parts, because you're gonna have those parts overlap each other. And here is the part that is really important. If you want to have good normal maps, by now you should have a solid understanding of whether you want to use normal maps in the game or whether you don't. If you do want to use them, then you want to ensure that there are no parts lying on top of each other, even if they are from the same category. So as well as ensuring that no other parts interfere with anything else of our model, like over here, As well as that, you want to ensure that the parts don't lie on top of each other. Let's reduce the size of this window and position it over here. And we need to select the top part of the face without selecting the bottom part in order to be able to manipulate it. To do this, we're going to select polygons in our viewport, and with it we've already selected some of the polygons on the side of the face over there, or the head rather. So we're going to press Alt and deselect them in the UV editor. Deselect everything including the ears and the inside of the mouth, and make sure that you didn't select anything else. Nothing of the right part of the face as well. And so we got ourselves a nice selection of the left part of the face. We want it to be sampling from the same area over here, but not to be on top of the current piece. That's why we're going to press over here, translate it by 1 unit to the right. So with this button pressed, we're going to put 1 or -1 if you want to. 1 over here, and repeat the process for all the parts. Shift them to the side or upwards if you want, so just input 1 into V. Another approach of selecting would be to select, for example, the ears in UV editor like this. But now you've selected both of them, obviously, because they're on top of each other. So simply go into the viewport and Alt and drag and deselect one of the ears. Doesn't really matter which one. Drag what's remaining by 1 unit to the right. As you can see, those parts are going to be sampling from exactly the same area of the texture, but now they aren't overlapping on top of each other. And when projecting normals, normal maps only goes onto this area, although right part of the face didn't contribute to a normal map projection in any way. It all went for the left part of the face. After this is done, and after you've readjusted the central part of the body to be split into 2 parts and then shifted them by 1 unit exactly as you did for the head, after you've done this, you can render the template and go in texture in Photoshop. Also, a nice tip is that if you can't switch to another object, even though you are on top of the stack, perhaps if you open it up, you'll see that you're still in face selection mode. So make sure you go up into Unwrap UVW, close it, and then you can switch to different objects in order to edit them. Right now we're going to switch to the body, and perhaps do normal map already for the body. Save it in a 1024 by 1024 image size, or 512 by 512 if you want to be really conservative. But do the normal mapping from your high polygon mesh, which is hidden at the moment, but if I reveal it to you, you'll see it. This is my high polygon mesh, and I'm going to project its details to our low polygon mesh, just like I've explained to you in the 3rd tutorial. So do the normal mapping and then create a template for your texture. To create a template, we're going to click into Edit on the body and go into Tools, Render UV Template, 1000th time. Do 1024 by 1024, fill as blue, edges as green, and show overlap with red, and so that you need to go and fix them. Do not show seam edges, because this is just going to show you this irritating green line, which is unnecessary because you already have black surrounding everything. Make sure you put solid over here and render. Here is the overlapping part over there, and this is exactly the problematic polygon that I was talking about before. So if we zoom in, we can probably tweak it. Yes, we can. Like this. Here we go. Now if we render, there shouldn't be any problems. And then you can hit here and save the image in the folder of your character. Temp stands for temporary in a JPEG format. Overwrite in my case. Should be best because it's a template. Okay. Then you can jump into Photoshop. When in Photoshop, you can click on File and create a new file, or you can simply drag your texture from the place where you saved it into Photoshop, like this. Notice that it created a layer called background, the one that is very tricky to alter by default. So just right click and create a layer from background, or simply double click on it and call it template. Let's create another layer underneath this one, just to be a background for us. Press Ctrl-Shift-N and create a background layer. Position it underneath of our template, and let's hide our template for a moment and fill it with a gray color. To do this, select your secondary color over here and press Ctrl backspace. Let's return our template back to be visible and press Select, Color Range, and select all the blue stuff. This is going to create a selection, just like explained in the second tutorial. Press delete now and get rid of this stuff. Now you can see the background showing through the holes of our template. And so to texture left and right parts of our body, we need to focus on creating drawings on those sides. It is very important to understand that your texture should be very similar on the seams, because those are the parts that are going to be joining. And if you're going to lay a blue color over here, for example, and then a red color over here, because it's a sleeve which is going to be wrapping, your two colors will meet each other and you'll see this direct seam. It's going to be very obvious in case of shadows, so make sure you watch it and perhaps simply copy some of the part over here and just paste it on this side as well, and then readjust it so that it blends in with the texture nicely. But then when the sleeve is rolled up, your texture is going to be exactly the same on both sides of the seam. Let's create a third layer, Ctrl-Shift-N, and call it main texture. This is, you guessed it, where our texture will go onto, and position it underneath of our template. You have to ensure that the style of texturing fits in with the game that you're developing. And for now, I've decided that my character is going to be a widow, which will get her skirt later. But right now, she just got basic trousers over here, and the skirt will go around her later. And so she should be in a sweater, but the game is a horror game, and it's pretty gray. So obviously I won't be putting rainbow colors on her. For now, I need to create a sweater type texture so that it wraps around the character nicely. And if I go back into Photoshop, I can also open my texture library, and you can see that I've got some of the textures ready for me to use. If you don't have a texture that you would like to use, or that you are permitted to use, perhaps just take a photo of material in real life, upload it on your computer, and then make use of it in Photoshop, such as, for example, the sweater texture, which is a wool texture. In my case, I have a wool image, so I will find it and will drag it into my workplace in Photoshop. If we leave it as it is obviously going to be very big compared to our model. So we want to reduce its size and duplicate it a couple of times. You can zoom in by pressing Ctrl and space and zooming in with the left click. Confirm the size when you're ready, and you can see that our image right now is in a form of a smart object, so it can't be directly edited with brush or erase, for example. In order to be able to adjust it, we need to right click on the layer and rasterize it. Let's press V and adjust its position accordingly, and perhaps press Ctrl J to copy the layer and select the new layer's wool and drag it down. Then merge those two layers in order to be able to work with them as a whole thing. You can see this annoying cut in our texture over here, so let's get rid of it with Clone Stamp tool. Because those two things are now merged in one layer, we can sample from one area and then paste whatever we have on another area. To sample with the Clone Stamp tool, first of all press S to select the Clone Stamp tool, and then press Alt and click on the area that you want to sample from, and let's set the opacity to be 33 for now. So Alt and click to sample, and then start drawing on the seam like this. Zoom in, and with lower opacity, let's even cover out the borders over here. Play around with opacities to ensure that you don't have those blurred parts, and to ensure that the squares of wool are aligning well. I find my woolen texture to be kinda compressed. I will zoom out, and with my woolen texture layer selected, I will press Ctrl T and stretch it out slightly, like this. Because it's now outside of the boundaries where I would like it to be, I'm going to press E, and with opacity of 100 and the brush size of sharp over here, I'm going to erase it from this part. If you look at your keyboard, next to the letters U, I, O, P, the next two buttons are curly brackets, and the left one reduces the brush size, and the right one, of course, increases it. You can also change the brush size by right-clicking, changing the size over here. If you're a texturer, and if you like to texture models, it would be a very good decision for you to use a tablet, because I find myself working much quicker and much faster with a tablet rather than with mouse. Let's duplicate this layer a couple of times, because this woolen pattern should go also on the arms, of course, because arms are part of the sweater as well, and the part of a character's back as well. So Ctrl J to do this, V to move it, and let's press Shift and slide it to the right. You want to keep the scale of this pattern equal, because when those parts join together, you want them to align correctly. In order to fill this gap over here, you need to use again the clone stamp tool, sample from nearby area, and just paste over here. Repeat the process for the arms as well. Duplicate the layer once again. Press Ctrl T to go into Transform Gizmo, and right click and select Flip Horizontal. Then press OK or Enter. Shift drag it to the left and work on eliminating this seam over here. To do this, you need to merge this layer with this one, and this is number 1 and this is number 2. 1 and 2. To merge them, you need to select this one and press Ctrl E. Now those two parts are fused into a whole single layer. And so we can now sample with a clone stamp tool from nearby areas and paste it wherever we want. Also, if you were more clever than me, you would probably make a template for the character with edges, so that you could see where your parts of the character are located at. And so I'm going to create another template for myself, save it on top of this current one in a JPEG format, and drag it once again into Photoshop. If it doesn't snap to the side of the screen, you want to go into View and select Snap. Now your image will be snapping to the corners of the screen, and after you are ready, press Enter to confirm the selection. Rasterize the layer, go into Select and select Color Range, Blue, Fuzziness 200, just to get those last bits out of our borders, and delete, and get rid of our old template. Now we see how our polygons are located. For my character, I want to create those folds on the bottom part of the elbow over here. And so if I go into our UV layout, let's click on some of the polygons over here and see where this fold will be occurring. So it's over here, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's 5th and 6th polygons over here in the center, slightly to the right. Open the Photoshop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's somewhere here. So let's create a new layer and call it Folds. Put it underneath of our template. Press B to switch into brush mode. Right click, and I want to select this nice pencil over here with the size of 9. For my primary color, I want to select dark brown, which is nearly gray. And for my secondary color, I just want to select gray. If I change the opacity to be higher, I can draw brown lines like this, and if I press X, I'm going to switch my gray color into the primary color slot, and I can draw with gray lines as well. If I press X again, I'll be drawing with brown, and if I press X again, of course I'll be drawing with gray lines. So right now I really need to draw a couple of folds over here with a brown color, and perhaps reduce the opacity of the whole layer down to about 13. Texturing is really a form of enhancing the look of your model, especially the one that is normal mapped. So if there is a normal mapped pocket detail on the character, you want to draw on top of that pocket's position, but you need to compare it to your normal map as well. Right now I've already normal mapped my character, and I can drag in texture on top of our current work, and with a snap it's going to snap to wherever it should be positioned. And right now you can see that the character has got some kind of scarf on top of the sweater, so this is where I should put the scarf's texture. If there would be a pocket somewhere here, that's where I would draw my pocket. You need this normal map over here, but its opacity should be lower so that you can see through the layers, and you will be turning it on and off all the time just to see where you need it. You are already familiar with Photoshop, and so I'll be drawing and perhaps stopping from time to time just to point out some of the interesting techniques that you could be using. Over here where the scarf goes, if you see, it's over here, and if I turn off my widow normals, you can see that I've already laid some of the texture over there with a pencil, which is over here, and with a darker color. I then redefine its borders, just like on the painting, and just position some of the lines over here so that it looks like some kind of folds. However, for the scarf, you would want to use a different texture or material rather for this area. So I will drag another image into our work. It's too big, so I'm going to rescale it and position it somewhere where I need it. Press enter and rasterize the layer. After this, let's get rid of the texture on the arms with the razor tool. Press L, select the area that we want to adjust, or simply adjust the whole layer without selecting, doesn't matter because it's separate. But anyway, go into Image Adjustments, Hue and Saturation, and decrease the saturation in my case, and change it to the blue color. Go into Image Adjustments and Levels, and increase the intensity by dragging the slider to the right, and increase whiteness by dragging to the left. Change the balance by shifting the central key. Press Ctrl D to deselect everything and switch to your wool texture, which is this one and this one. And really they should be merged together, so click on the top one, press Ctrl E and merge with the bottom one. And maybe with this one as well, so Ctrl E, and now you have the whole wool texture ready for you. After this, let's have a glance at our normal maps and get rid of our pink stuff anywhere where the scuff wouldn't be going on to. So over here and over here, as well as on the inside. After this, let's turn off our normals and reduce the opacity on the pink stuff. You can also erase some of the parts of the wool where the scuff goes onto, obviously working with the wool layer. And perhaps, because wool is now detached, just fuse both of the wool parts into one layer like this. Our pink stuff is on top of our drawings, which are our folds, so let's position them below it so that we can see the folds like so. And maybe the folds should be renamed to folds first of all, and the opacity should be lowered down to about 50. Let's change the color to a pink or maybe dark pink, and with our brush lay down a couple of strokes. Let's change the color once again to some kind of brighter pink and put some of the horizontal strokes. Select a different kind of brush over here, increase its size, and it's very subtle brush, so let's increase the opacity to 100. And this is what we'll be doing to lay down shadows. Lay down shadows somewhere on the sides. Perhaps the color should be darker, maybe black. And with this approach, you're going to give volume to your objects that are especially normal mapped. You can really exaggerate the look of the shadows by duplicating the layer with pressing Ctrl J, but then you can reduce the opacity, for example, or do something with this copy layer and perhaps erase some of the parts over here. Sadly, I didn't find an option of a contrast brush, but this is how you can put different contrasts with just erasing parts of the copy layers from top of each other. And you can even create some kind of folds with just laying down strokes with your erase brush of a small size. After this, you might want to fuse those two layers, so select both of them and press Ctrl E to fuse them together. On the sweater, you can also create some kind of folds with thin strokes of the brush to create those kind of folds, little ones, or you can create a big wavy effect with just laying shadows with this brush in different kind of strokes. Don't forget that this is going to be mirrored, so you don't want to use this effect too much, because everything you do on the left side will be duplicated to the right side. And obviously if you put strokes same as the equal sign, for example, over here, they're gonna get duplicated to the other side as well. So make sure that anything you do isn't going to be exaggerated and amplified by the second side displaying it. And make sure that the changes you do on the seams are going to be similar on the other parts joining this seam. Right now you can check the progress and see how the texture actually looks on the character, but of course you'll see those huge seams showing up, and I'll show you how you can fix this later if you didn't guess it already. Make sure you turn off the template layer and your normals because you don't need them, and simply go into File, Save As, or even simpler, press Ctrl-Shift-S, which is a nice shortcut, and in your folder with character, save your texture with the name texture, diffuse, because diffuse is your main color texture. There are usually three kind of categories of textures. Diffuse displays the color, normal map displays also colors in a form of RGB, just to outline the direction the light should be reflecting at when hitting the model, creating this illusion of details on the map, on the model. And the third one is a height map, which is black and white, and which is used in parallax occlusion mapping, in the bump mapping. Save your texture as diffuse in a JPEG format, or PNG if you prefer it, but JPEG for now. And for your main character texture, you don't want to go higher than 300 kilobytes. And right now it's at 200, so it will be growing as we develop the texture. But right now 9 is okay. If we go back to our 3ds Max, we can press M and open our material editor and assign a material to our model. Let's call it window material. For our diffuse, we can click on this little square, or just to give you a better explanation of what's happening over here, you have this maps fold. This little square is simply representing this slot for your diffuse color over here. You can stick in bump map, which is your normal map over here, but right now we just need diffuse color. So let's click on it so that we're using it. It should be 100%, and let's go into bitmap because we're sampling from a texture, and select our texture from wherever we saved it. If we go out, you see that now we have this slot filled up, and we're using diffuse color in our material. Because it's already applied to the model, it's already sitting on top of our model, but you don't see it yet because you didn't press this little button over here. When texturing, it's very important that you are working with high quality texture in viewport, because if you're working with crappy quality, when looking at those joints and the seams, it might seem that everything is okay. However, if you go into the game engine and view the full quality, you might see that the little parts are not actually aligned, and it creates this ugly seam look. So in order to avoid this and be a pro, let's go into Customize, Preferences, click in Viewports, choose Driver, which is DirectX 10, and also Configure Driver, and let's select the highest download texture size over here, and perhaps background texture size as well over here should be highest. Texture lookup should be anisotropic, and mip-map lookup should be linear. Mip-maps are the simplified version of texture which the engine creates for itself, and it seamlessly substitutes those simplified version of textures as the model gets closer to the camera or further away. Click OK, and save your work and restart your 3ds Max just to have those options applied. I have this projection modifier annoyingly sticking out, so I'm going to drag it under my unwrap UVW, right click, collapse to, because collapse all would just collapse all the modifiers including the one on top of it, but collapse to just collapses down to collapses all the modifiers down to editable poly. So yes, and our unwrap UVW is still there for us to tweak, but projection is no longer there. And you can see that we're creating this kind of nice representation of a scarf or anything on top of our model right here. Watch out for the seams that you can track over here, and really they are only visible because the texture doesn't line up over here. Because this half and this half are literally sampling from the same texture, there shouldn't be any kind of problems over here except for doubled size of parts in the exact middle. But for some reason the texture doesn't seem to line up over here. This obviously gives us a subtle hint that our part is slightly misplaced, and so if we bring it down by 1 unit to the left, so -1 in U, you can see that indeed it doesn't line up correctly with this part. If we reposition it correctly and zoom in really closely to ensure that everything lines up perfectly, you're going to see that the problem kind of disappears over here. But once again, watch out so that you don't duplicate details, because right here you see that you've been texturing left part only. However, when it's reflected to the other side, it creates this kind of strange picture on the front of the character. Make sure you avoid those details and create beautiful characters. For the hands and for the face, for example, you can take image of your own skin, or you can get material from somewhere else, but you can put it down just like you did with wool in the Photoshop and texture out hands correctly. But once again, watch out for the seams. You see that there is a ugly seam over here, and those are two different parts already. When we select those polygons, you see that they belong to a different part than those ones, and those ones are over here, which are effectively those three polygons over here. So when texturing, make sure that this part is copied and pasted into here and flip to the right, just to ensure that the transition is smooth and seamless. This is very important if you have some kind of patterns such as wool and shadows as well. If you are like me, you might find it easier and more comfy to work in an environment which is more cozy. You can change the gray background easily by going over here, clicking a viewport background, and select viewport background from the files. For example, an image of your girlfriend or whatever you want, or some kind of warm material like old canvas or paper, anything you really like. Then press OK and make sure that in viewport background, show background is selected. Currently it's going to be only showing in your perspective window over here and will not be shown in any other windows, but you can change this if you alter the options in the background window. You can zoom in and out of windows easily by pressing Alt W. Here is a very tricky part. In tutorial 2, we textured a whole building with one 1024 by 1024 texture. And if you look closely, if you put it in the game engine, the texture doesn't look very detailed. So how do you build those nice buildings where each wall looks like it has been applied a 1024 texture to it? It looks like you will need a huge texture to texture the whole building at once as a single mesh. But really you can create different meshes and prepare your own Lego of parts, which can be then joined together straight away in game engine. You just need to make sure that they're fitting each other in 3ds Max before exporting them into Unity engine. Have a look at this scene. Those are the parts that are duplicated away from each other and are slightly tweaked. However, for each one you will need to adjust the UV layout accordingly, so it takes some time. But after your parts are ready, you can use them in game engine in any way you want, and actually build different buildings out of the same parts. Just ensure that they fit together. So for example, obviously, if this is a side part over here, you want it to be fitting this one accordingly. You don't want it to be too big or too small, so have each part relatively similar to its neighbors. You're already quite advanced with texturing, and so you're probably guessing that I'm using the same texture for all the parts. But if you notice, they are textured differently and are sampling from different areas of the texture. The flow of work over here is to firstly create a mesh, copy different parts and alter them slightly so that they have differences amongst each other. Second is to create a texture, 1024 by 1024 texture in Photoshop. And finally, while looking at this texture, create the UV layout for each part based on this texture. In this case, I wanted the parts to look like they are made from a wooden material, the planks. And so, in case of a window, I had to ensure that the texture lines up with the lines over here, with the outside and inside as well. If we go into Edit, you can see the layout that I'm following right now. Because my texture is tileable, and I'll explain to you slightly further how you can create tileable textures, but because it is, going to the right from the texture from here will be an invisible transition to you. And so you can simply select the walls and position them wherever you want them to be. Because I wanted to add this difference between different parts, I actually didn't use the whole texture for my front and back walls, but I positioned them slightly aside. I used the texture almost twice over here for my parts, because I've used this half of the square over here, which only took one half of the building, or one half of the wall. And over here I used the same texture a second time. Basically this part over here is sampling from this area over here. and this part is obviously sampling from this part as well. So I've used the texture twice on this area, but the transition over here is seamless because the texture is tileable. It is quite easy to position them so that the parts have lines lined up correctly, because any change you do to the vertices, for example if you select this one, any change you do to it in the UV layout table will be displayed over here in the viewport, and so you can line up your lines correctly. If you don't like this green seam, obviously turn off show map seam or show seams if you have your own seams over there, and line up your texture correctly. This way create a nice UV layout, and of course you can position your parts even outside of the box right here. But if you have a higher polygon model to be projected onto this wall, say you've created it in ZBrush, then you must realize that your parts shouldn't be overlapping each other. So move them one space up or down. Right now I will show you how to create a tileable texture, and I will show you also how to create a normal map, so-called dirty normal map, because it's a basic normal map created in Photoshop from your scratches and isn't really a projection of higher to lower, really quickly and really dirty. So for now, tileable textures. And so we return to our Photoshop with the mission of creating a tileable texture. Let's go into File and create a new file, or simply press Ctrl N and create a new file called tileable texture. Let's create a one with 1024 by 1024 dimensions, resolution 72, and press OK. Right click and layer from background, or simply double click on the background and call it tileable texture. You can always rename your layers by double clicking on them and typing in whatever you want. But for now, we want to create a tileable texture out of blanks. For example, those ones. If I press OK and rasterize the layer, you can see that if I move it down to the side, like so, if I duplicate the layer and drag this one to the right, if we stick it all together, it doesn't really seem like it's tileable, because you have this little cut over here, which is actually quite hidden in this case, so it's not a very good example. But if I select both of the layers and move them down like so, press Ctrl J, you will see that the texture doesn't line up properly over here when it's tiled. I'm gonna show you a very good approach of how to create a tileable texture out of this one. All you need to do is to create a smooth transition from over here to here, and from over here to here, so that the parts are equal on the sides, and when tiled are not gonna be showing any kind of seams and will tile seamlessly. To do this, you need to ensure that the image you are working with doesn't have anything hidden from us in the viewport. So in order to do this, we're going to select a crop tool, press Ctrl A on the wood texture, press Enter, and crop out anything that's outside and is not visible. Once this is done, you can continue working. But this is an important part. Actually, our tileable texture is now used for us right now, so let's just delete this and rename our layer into tileable texture. Let's get out of the crop tool and use marquee tool for now, and let's go into filter, other, offset. And because our texture is 1024 by 1024, we would like to offset it by half of that size, so 512 by 512. And you see that this is our bottom left corner, and this is our top left corner, this is our top right corner, this is our bottom right corner. If we will be tiling this texture, it's gonna look ugly at the moment, and so we need to ensure that the transition between those sides is nice and smooth. To be able to do this, your rasterized layer should be altered with a clone stamp tool, so press S, and opacity should be somewhere at 60, increase the size slightly, and first of all, let's ensure that the cracks or the lines are lining up correctly. So maybe with a smaller size, simply sample from here and enforce a line over here, like this. Do the same for the rest. Also, straight after sampling, before you start drawing, you see in the little circle how your texture is going to be positioned. I want to create this transition into the bottom line. That's why I'm going to find out a spot where this circle looks good with this image inside of it, and press left click and simply drag down. Also sample from here and create this transition over here as well. Do the same for this part. After this has been done, select a higher size of the brush and maybe a softer representation of it like this, and with opacity of 40 or 30 even, sample from different areas and start to cover the areas that you want to hide, where you want to hide the cracks. Select smaller size so that you can come closer to those lines without touching them and cover the surface. Of course, sample from nearby areas so that the transition isn't so noticeable. Right now we have this kind of big spot over here, a rectangular, which we're going to fix later. For now, just focus on removing this visibility of the line in the center. Also try to extend the obvious details, especially over the central line. You see that this crack is going through the center, perhaps help it out and extend it slightly further as well. After you are done with the central line, work on the vertical line. A very helpful tool, which I almost forgot to tell you about, but actually remembered, is that you can click on here on the rulers, and if you don't have them, press Ctrl R, but click on this ruler and drag down, and you can create yourself some kind of alignment line along which you can work with. And also, if you have in the view, if you turned on the snap option, anything that you align is going to be regarded to this line as well, and will be snapping it like to anything else. If you want to move this line or get rid of it, just press Ctrl, click on it, and drag outside away from the working area, and it's going to disappear. After you've eliminated the appearance of those clear lines, it is time to adjust further, and now try to remove this black spot away from here, also with clone stamp, but sample from a brighter area. Always work from the lines, so for example, sample from here and position your brush somewhere here and start drawing to the left. Watch out so that you don't press Ctrl Y, because this is usually a shortcut in other programs such as 3ds Max for forward rolling. So if you press Ctrl Y, that's just going to brighten your image, and you can press Ctrl Y again to deselect it, to revert it. But Ctrl Alt Z is rollback and Ctrl Shift Z is forward roll. I think this is quite obvious that this part is too big, and so we need to sample from this line and add a line over here, perhaps with 100% opacity. Perfect. Now ensure that the parts aren't duplicated over here, and specifically for this part over here, sample with clone stamp tool and smaller brush size, perhaps hard one. Sample from over here with opacity of about 20 and get rid of this spot, which was very similar to this part. Clearly this part is similar to this one, so sample from somewhere here and just cover it up. Get rid of obvious similarities, because you're gonna have enough of them when you tile a texture. Sample from over here, from this spot, and put it down somewhere here. And maybe even this one somewhere here. Make sure that those creases and fiber, make sure that it is visible on parts where you've clone stamped, so you don't lose the detail, and make sure you put them down there so that they are quite visible. So sample from different parts at a higher opacity. because if your planks won't have fiber on them, they're just gonna look like plastic, and you don't want this. You're almost done creating your own tileable texture, but the last thing to do is to go into Filter, Other, and Offset by 512 on each side, and check once again that you don't have any differences on the transitional parts. And so you finished creating your own tileable texture. You can now save it in a JPEG format somewhere where it's accessible to you. For the environment, you don't want it to be larger than 500 kilobytes, which is quite big already. But if you are conservative and you have many parts that are sharing it, that high quality isn't such a big issue. So save it with a acceptable quality and press OK. Then after this you can create a material, assign it to your mesh, assign to this material your texture, and in the UV editor, since you are working with tileable texture, you can position your parts anywhere where you want them to be and scale them as big as you want. You could then adjust vertices and see the changes in the viewport just to see that the planks are aligning correctly. In this case, you can simply select the polygon over here and realize that it's this one and start readjusting the vertices. Drag this one down and ensure that you're only working with one, because right now, because I clicked on it in the viewport, just like I explained in the beginning, make sure you deselect anything else over here and drag it up like so, or down if you need to, and make sure that the lines are connecting correctly. You cannot call yourself a pro unless you work with the right units. For that, go into Customize, Units Setup, and right now, because we're working with Unity, we want it to be in metric, and in metric we want to select centimeters, because by default it's generic units. If you find this too big, scale down your object from the center over here in this mode, so left click and hold and select this mode over here. If you don't know how to scale, go to the first tutorial and check it out. But scale down or upwards correctly, uniformly, so this scaling would be non-uniform. So scale it down to the size you want to. Going into Utilities over here with the object selected, press Reset X-Form, Reset Selected. Then go into the Modify panel and right click, Collapse All. After this, make sure you name your object to a convention that's easy for you to follow, such as, for example, wooden hut, wall, plus window number 1, because I already have number 2 somewhere, also with a window, but slightly different to this one. Make sure you've positioned your pivot point on the bottom part of the object over here, very close to the floor. So you would be going into the third part over here, pivot effect pivot point only. Then you will be changing the pivot point position to wherever you want. Best to position it in the center floor over there. Unclick it and once again go into Reset X-Form, Reset Selected, and then with it selected, go into here, hold your mouse over here without clicking, and you will have this option pop up. So Export Selected and export as a part, for example. But for you, it should be following the convention of this specific part. So paste this name into here, into an FBX format, save, and then FBX export. Unclick the animation, make sure it's not on, and make sure, this is very important, that you are exporting in centimeters, because Unity works in centimeters. Press OK, and your export is ready. Here is an example of a perfectly tileable texture that I've done in my free time. I'm using this one on the models of my hut and the buildings. Those are basic wooden planks, and in order to create dirty normal maps, you will need a special plugin supplied by NVIDIA called NVIDIA Normal Map Filter. Once you get it and install it, it's gonna show up under Filter, and it's gonna be under NVIDIA Tools folder. But let's say you've got this perfectly tileable texture and you need to create normal map out of it. Dirty normal maps are generated from the differences of black and white grayscale. That's why we're going to desaturate our image by pressing Ctrl-Shift-U, and straight away you can see that it became black and gray. And let's press R and rotate it just relative to the screen. So the top is still looking upwards over there, the bottom is still looking diagonally downwards. But just for our ease of drawing, we're gonna rotate it like this. This is very dark, so we need to press Ctrl L and adjust the levels. If we bring this slider to the left, this is gonna increase the level of whiteness on our image. And if we bring the left slider to the right, that's gonna increase the darkness. So basically increasing the contrast like this. Push it really high like so. Press OK and grab a brush, so press B. Right click and select a brush with a fall off. And for your primary color, select white color. Increase the size of the brush. Duplicate this layer, and to do this press Ctrl J. Call this one Reserve. On the main one, we're going to grab a brush, increase its size, and with the white color we're going to paint over the planks. And perhaps hide the reserve so that we can see what we're doing on the main. After you've done the whitening out of the planks, you would want to create a new layer by pressing Ctrl Shift N and call this Outline. And with a smaller brush size, its color being gray, you want to draw on top of the lines. If you are too lazy to draw several lines because you are in outline layer, you can simply press L and go into lasso mode over here, outline this line, then press Ctrl J to duplicate it, press Shift and move it to the side. Then merge those layers together, and don't forget to draw the lines on the joints. The trick here is really to achieve this great and smooth transition between black and white. The more smooth the transition is, the more round your planks will look like. Perhaps make use of gradient over here, but I'm not going to explain to you how to use it right now. But if you manage to, great. With this approach, you've just outlined the basic planks for your surface. And if you want to create a surface detail such as scratches, that's why you've created your reserve layer over here. So as proposed earlier, let's assume that I finished all of the texture, but really just look at this part over here and how it's going to be transformed later. I want to change the opacity of my outline level by 30% down to this amount, and then press Ctrl E and fuse it with main. Then with my main selected, let's go to Filter, NVIDIA Tools, Normal Map Filter, and for Unity you need to invert the Y-axis so that the light falls correctly on the model. So invert Y, let's do average RGB. Here is really what will push out this dirty normal map. Let's do 8, 4 samples. Do not animate light because this is just for testing. Add height to normal map, minimal Z at 0, and press OK. Notice how this part has now an appearance of planks, and ideally those cracks wouldn't be here, and you would achieve them with overlaying your reserve layer on top of this one. So right now, switch on your reserve, go into Filter, NVIDIA Tools, Normal Map Filter, and don't do 8 but do about 5. And then reduce the opacity of our reserve layer down so that we reveal whatever is underneath it. And underneath it we have main. Put it down to about 60, maybe 50. And then you have nice planks. But this is a dirty normal map, and ensure that it's stylable as well. So go through Filter, Other, Offset everything. But however, before that you need to fuse everything together with Ctrl E and crop everything out. So press Ctrl A with crop tool and press enter to crop everything outside of the borders. Then you would go into Filter, Other, and Offset by 512 by 512, and ensure that it's stylable as well. And so in this lesson we've covered lots of topics. You already know how to unwrap a live mesh such as character correctly, and you already know how to optimize it for gaming. You've been explained how to text your character correctly in accordance to the normal maps that you've prepared. You've been warned of that you need to shift your parts away from each other so that normal map projection works correctly. And you also have been explained how to create tileable textures so that you can sample from them when creating your architectural parts, your own Lego. My name is Igor Aherne, and I would like to thank everybody for watching this tutorial. Keep watching, subscribe, and put a like. Many thanks, and see you later.